on account of @Ghostly Gloom Stories for supporting this video. More details toward the end. Carrie wanted nothing to do with the daily hustle and bustle of working in the city, driving early in the morning for a job that was only a half-hour away due to the ridiculous amount of traffic she had to battle through. To make matters worse, she was undeniably beautiful, with her sparkling blue eyes and vibrant red hair that seemed to glow whenever it came under direct light in the city, which made her a target for whistling and being chased after by less than well-meaning colleagues. In the end, she could no longer deal with these issues and decided to quit her job and do what she wanted to do the most. Fortunately, she had a sizable amount of money set aside and a good chunk of savings that allowed her to live comfortably for at least a year. As such, she had 1 year to make it big as a writer or she was in trouble. Not wanting to live in the city anymore, she also moved out into the woods, choosing to buy a relatively small yet cozy cabin. Her family was understandably upset about this decision, but she didn't care about their disappointments. What was done, as she told them. The first few weeks out there were a great success for her, at least to her. She wrote thousands of words every day for short stories and even a big novel she had in between her writing sprees. She would take walks around her property, absorbing the sweet and natural scents that the outside world had to offer, drawing inspiration from the earth around her and the occasional appearance of a small woodland critter that brought her joy. One day, however, when she was on one of her walks a few miles from her cabin, she encountered something odd. Beneath one of the pine trails she frequently visited was a somewhat hidden-looking skull that gave her a great deal of concern and confusion. She knelt down to examine it and raised an eyebrow as she looked it over. By all measurements, it seemed to be a normal deer skull, complete with antlers. There were 2 odd additions to the skull, however. The first was that there were 2 small horns that jutted just above where the brow would be, and the second was that just beneath where its eye sockets were, there was another set of eyes about the size of a human's. Hoping it was just some gruesome prank or an artistic creation, and not some horrifying presence, she decided to pick it up and find out for herself. After touching the skull, she immediately felt a deep sense of dread surge throughout her body, making her feel sick. Carrie backed away from it quickly, staring at it in horror as she stumbled to her feet and ran all the way back to her cabin, trying to ignore the sensation of being watched as she did so. When she got back, she slammed the door behind her and locked it. She then shut her blinds and looked outside through them to see if there was actually someone there or if her mind was just playing tricks on her. When nothing happened after a few minutes, she slumped down onto her couch and sighed in relief, chalking the situation up to just being isolated from others for an extended period. That evening, as she was writing, she was interrupted by the loud snorting of a deer. She laughed, thinking it was just some buck making its way through the area. Her hands froze in fear when a chorus of snorts spoke up continuously. Quickly, she switched off all the lights inside, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and went to the window, praying that it was just a group of deer outside. To her total and complete dismay, she was wrong. Standing in front of her cabin, about 10 yards away, were 3 people wearing long black cloaks. Adorning their heads were deer skulls, the same kind of deer skull that she had encountered earlier that day. One by one, they made the same snorting sounds from before, only this time they started walking toward the cabin. Understandably freaked out, she grabbed her phone and attempted to call the police. Tears filled her eyes as she saw "No service" written across the top of her phone. In frustration, she threw it on the ground and returned to the window to see that they were nearly at her door now, their snorts louder than ever. She screamed at them to go away, that she was armed, and to just leave her alone. After her panic-filled outburst, she backed away from the window, shakily holding the knife in her hand. Seconds later, she collapsed into a crying wreck as the individuals outside began banging on her door. "Go away!" she screamed. The banging grew louder and more persistent as time went by, until right when she thought she couldn't endure it any longer, it stopped. "What?" she asked aloud, surprised that the threat had seemingly moved on. She relaxed her body and leaned against the wall to pull herself together. Without warning, a loud metallic clunking sound was heard, and she watched her door handle fall out of the door and onto the wooden floor below. Slowly, her door creaked open, and in stepped the tallest of the 3 masked individuals. Even with his face obscured, She could tell how disfigured and distorted his features were beneath the skull. "Oh, please leave. Don't make me use this," Carrie yelled as she raised the knife back up and pointed it toward him. He did nothing but stand silently, outstretching his arms as though he were a saint posing for a painting. In defiance, Carrie screamed and charged at the man, knife ready to pierce his chest. Quicker than the wind, he smacked her hand aside and followed up with a powerful punch to her stomach, doubling her over in the process. She collapsed limply into his arms, gasping and heaving for air. "Chair," she heard him command. The other two rushed into the cabin, grabbing a chair from her dining table. They set it in the center of the room, and Carrie was carefully seated in it, helpless and vulnerable. She whimpered for them to take whatever they wanted, but to just leave her alone as they proceeded to tie her down with twine. The goddess detests material goods. Divinity has no need for such trivial things. What she seeks is beauty and the ability to create beauty. "You're a writer, yes? Surely, you know what I mean." "How do you know I'm a writer?" she asked, confused and scared. "Because the goddess led you to us, my dear." "I don't understand," Carrie murmured as she looked between the three men. "Sculptures, paintings, pottery, structures, books, temples, all made by the hands of talented individuals. You should feel honored," he continued. Carrie squinted at him, utterly baffled by the situation. "Why, what are you doing here?" "She says you have beautiful arms, Carrie." Tears returned to her eyes as her stomach sank. So much potential, not yet realized. This is what she desires, and you have exactly that. He walked behind Carrie and placed his hands on her shoulders, running his hard fingers along her arms. Carrie shuddered and swallowed hard. "You don't really," she whimpered. "I'm sorry, child. I truly do feel sorry for you," he said as his grip tightened around her shoulders, his fingernails digging into her skin and drawing blood. Carrie screamed in pain. "But just think. You'll be part of something so truly beautiful that this pain, this suffering, will become something to celebrate." Realizing what was about to happen to her, Carrie's eyes widened, and she flailed, begging and pleading to be let go. But those pleas fell on deaf ears as the men paid no attention to her cries. Detective Holt walked under the yellow tape that surrounded the cabin of Carrie Wilkins and went straight inside. In the center of the room sat the woman in question. He shook his head and did his best not to vomit at what he saw. A ring of leaves surrounded the chair that Carrie sat in, and a crown of twigs and flowers adorned her bloodied head. Her mouth was stuffed with a couple of berries resting upon her tongue. Worst of all, her arms had been precisely removed, and pools of blood soaked the leaves beneath her still bleeding stumps. Holt left the cabin, loosened the tie to his suit in frustration, and scratched his rough, graying beard as he pondered where to go from that disturbing sight. He was approached by an officer. "I'm sure you're aware the victim was found early this morning, due to her parents making an unannounced visit and finding her in that state. Do you have any news for me? Or are you just repeating to me verbally the messed up officer I just saw?" Holt grumbled. The young officer cleared her throat and apologized. "This was found on the table next to the victim." She handed him a folded piece of paper that had a roughly drawn skull and blood on it. It read as follows: "The time for the goddess to awaken has come. With her arms, she creates. But what use are arms without eyes with which to see her own creations? Cultists." Holt grunted as he glanced back inside at the mutilated woman. "What do we do, sir?" "Haha, drink. It's going to be a long day,"